This is a customer's quilt, and I'm going to cut it up and totally change the look of it. Do I dare? You bet I do. Hi, I'm Di with Sister Chicks Quilting, and welcome to my channel. Look what I'm standing in front of. It's from the 70s, and it is called Flower Power. Guess who the designer is? I bet a lot of you already know. It's Maurene McCormick. You guys know who that is? Hello, Jan Brady. I think it's so exciting that she's designing fabric now. And boy, these colors are so 70s. I love them. Let me tell you why I have it. I got a call from a customer named Christy. She basically said, "Help, I don't know what I'm doing." After talking with her, this is her very first quilt ever. She just started sewing because the fabric is so cute. How many of us did that? I did. I'm going to show you later in the video the very fabric that I bought. Anyway, let's get on with this quilt. I want to show you what I'm going to do with it. Let me share my plan with you. This is a good fit for the center of a quilt, maybe down to about here. I'm going to unpick this seam right here about here. Then I plan on taking this bottom part and cutting it up into strips. It's going to be a fun project. I'm going to pull out my trusty new seam ripper. Isn't that gorgeous? It is made from a pine cone filled with resin and then turned. I get my seam rippers and stilettos from Verl over at Pens and More here in Emmett. They're so sharp. Just take a few seams out. That was fast, wasn't it? The next step needs a little bit of squaring up so I can measure it. I'm going to pull off the extension table, giving me more room. I've folded this in half just for ease in cutting. I'm going to square up this top piece, taking as little as I can off of it. This fold is laid out right here along this line, quite even. I feel good about that. I think this is going to work. I don't think I wasted too much of her fabric. Let's look at that other side now. What I want is this piece on the bottom to be very even. So there we have a nice square edge to work with. The next step I'm going to take is measure the outside dimensions of this quilt. I was talking to April Story on the phone from April's Craft Room, and she told me throw it up on the design wall. Well, I'm glad I did. I mean, we have design walls for a purpose, right? But this was my vision, to have a border of the lighter white and then this scrappiness, which this scrappy border came from the other half of the main body of the quilt. And then this is the border and the binding. I'm standing back looking at it and not liking what I see. It's too busy here between the scrappy border and this border. It needs something, in my opinion, to break them up. And I decided, instead of doing a big wide border that's white, why not cut this in half and do two small white borders? Well, sort of white, right? Then I will have a piece of this between this, and it won't look as busy. Here's my problem. I only have 24 inches of this and 24 inches of this. I've been trying to do the math on it, and let me show you. It's not pretty. There's this, and there's this. I got so confused. When I was doing the math, some of the numbers ended up the same, and I couldn't figure it out. I thought, how did I change this to a square quilt? Well, I had to call in the big guns to figure it out. Let me show you the math. I'm trying to figure out how wide to make that inner border, that white one. I'm very visual, and this is how I do it. The center measurement of the center quilt was these two measurements times 2. You always times the width and the length by 2 because there's 2 sides. That totaled out to be 178 inches. Now I have 24 inches of fabric. That's 42 inches wide. How many strips do I need? What you do is you take the 178 inches and you divide it by the width of the fabric, which is 42 inches. So, because you're wanting 42-inch strips. That gives you 4.23. You always round up to 5 strips. So, how wide do I make those strips? I started thinking about that and all the other borders that I was putting on and looking at my math, and my mind just kind of blew up. That's when I called the engineer in. I showed him this diagram and he said, that's pretty good. Let's make sure you did it right. The engineer approved my math and my drawing. So this is the quilt center. It's 38.5 by 50.5. So that's this line and this line. Now this little dotted line is the seam. When I do these borders, I always do the sides first and the tops last. So the top inches has got this little bit put on it here. Okay, I hope that makes sense. The first outer border I was going to make, or actually the first inner border I was going to make 1.75 inches, and this one was going to be 1.75 inches because I was going to, because that's what I was going to do. But it didn't work out. The math didn't calculate because I only have 24 inches worth of fabric. Let me tell you something. You can just forget all this math and buy fabric more than you need. The only time you really need to do math is when you have a limited amount of fabric. So if you're rich and just want to go buy a whole bunch of fabric and have a bunch left over, just do whatever you want. Forget all of this. But if you want to learn how I do it, here we go. This is the skinny white border. And when you put the skinny white border on, this number jumps up to this number. Now, the funny thing is these two numbers are the same because this is from here down. So this one ends here and this one ends here. So these two numbers are the same, and this one is got a number plus this 1.75 inches on it. Oh, something else I want you to know. I never include seam allowance when I'm figuring because you know you're going to add on 1/2 inch for seam allowances anyway. And seam allowances on a diagram like this is going to be confusing. I just add those on at the end. This is how the numbers work out for me. Then you go to the big wide scrappy border right here. That's going to be 6 inches wide. That will bring this 42 measurement on this side up to 54 inches. And are you ready for a mind blower? It brings this measurement to 54 inches. And I'm like, what? Wait a minute. What's going on? I don't want to make a square quilt. How did it get square? Down here, it was rectangle. It was rectangle. Why is it square? Why are these numbers the same? Enter the engineer. This little piece right here is why. Even though this is 54 inches for the full top and bottom, and this is 54 inches, the quilt is not going to be square because this comes above it. So I got calmed down and I continued on with my map. And I used this to help me figure out how wide I could make my outside border, this fabric. This answer to this question, how wide I want to make it, all depends on everything in between. So you have to work it out. Well, let's talk about those borders. This right here is the border. I have 24 inches of fabric. I have 250.5 inches of fabric that I need. And where did I get that? By adding this times 2 and this times 2. So these numbers by 2, the width plus the length plus the width times 2 totaled up to be 250.5 inches. Then I divide that by 42 inches because my fabric is 42 inches wide. And that equals 5.96 strips. I'm going to round up to 6 inches. Now that's actually going to be really close at 5.96. We'll discuss that later and I'll show you what I'm doing about that, because I want a wide border on this quilt. So I'm going to go 24 inches divided by 6 strips right here equals 4-inch strips. So I need 6 4-inch strips to put on the border for this quilt. Easy, right? Well, I think it's so, at least. I hope that was as clear as mud for you as it was for me. You know, there's a lot of figuring if you have a limited amount of fabric. So I really wish I'd have bought a little bit more, but I was being concerned about the customer's pocketbook. I think I can do this. So I'm going to take all of these pieces off my design wall and start cutting. Would you like to join me? When I figured out the measurements for the white fabric, because I'm cutting it in half, the border in half, it was not going to work out to give me the needed strip if I did it at 1.75. Sadly, it's going to be a skinny little border. It will still do the separation work. So I've had to cut it down. When I was figuring out the white border, I had it at 1.75. And that was gonna be a nice size border. However, I didn't have enough fabric. So I cut it down to 1.5. It'll be 1/4 inch less, but it's still going to do the same job. And this way, I have enough of the fabric to fit the quilt. Now, normally I connect these strips on the bias like this and sew a seam across them on a 45-degree angle. However, this is really close. I am cutting it close. So what I'm doing is lining up on the selvage edge, and I'm just sewing right across those, and then I'm cutting off the edge of the selvage. I normally don't do that. It's okay to do it, but I don't want to run out of fabric. And after having done all of that exercise, I'm really sincerely wishing I'd have bought more fabric. But this will work out. You watch. Let's get this ironed. I thought I would show you a few things I have been up to this week. I have company from out of town. The engineer's brother and sister-in-law are here, and she is so busy she never gets time to quilt. Over the weekend, she and I completed it. We're going to take it down, get it on the long arm. Now I'm going to get back to the quilt. Well, this is where I am. I think it's adorable, and I want to talk to you about a couple of techniques I used to put this border on and make it look as good as it does. I have a special assistant in my room today. It's my sister-in-law. I showed you the quilt she and I made. She is helping me out. Thank you, Wendy. That's what it's going to look like. What do you think? I'm really liking it. As I was putting this scrappy border on, when I got to here, the end of the small border, this end was down here about 1/2 inch. And I didn't want to just cut it off because then it would look really bad. It would look like it was cut off. So this is my magic trick. Are you ready for this? Can you see that there are 2 rows of stitching on these 2 pieces put together? The one on this side is the original row, and the one on this side is my second row that I sewed on. What I did was sew the second row on, and then I got out my trusty little seam ripper and unpicked it. If you take that space between the 2, it's almost 1/4 inch. Now, can you tell where on this I did that? No, you can't. That is my little trick. And guess what? It works the other way as well. So for perchance, if you got here and this piece was up here just over, then what you do is sew your seam on this side. You take it in a little bit. And if you do that here, here, and just a few spots on your quilt, it fits. Isn't that a fun trick? Go ahead and use it. Little adjustments like that make the difference between, I don't know, what do they make the difference between? I don't know, Wendy, what do they make the difference between? There you go. Little differences. Taking the time for those little differences is the difference of having your seams lining up, your blocks being square. So go for it and do it. And then this is how it's going to look. I need to sew this border on, and then here's my outside border. What do you think? They're pretty cool borders, and they're going to be darling when they're sewed on. So, you know, I better get to it. So early in the video, I told you that I had bought a jelly roll and just started sewing when I was a new quilter. I'm going to show you that because we all make mistakes. We all have to start somewhere. My folly was an apron. So there was this apron hanging up there, and they had signs everywhere. Do not take photos. And I'm like, I don't need a pattern to make that. I can do that. I'm smart. I'm taking my phone like this, click, 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 you know. And I came home with my jelly roll and a little bit of extra yardage, and I started making my apron. Now this is what's left of my jelly roll. You may recognize it. This is called Saltaire. It's a Moda print, and I loved the colors on it. It was out probably in 2013, I'm guessing. But here is my apron bottom. It's jelly rolls, as you can see, and I thought, well, I'm going to put this scalloped border on the bottom. I don't have a pocket on the jelly roll side because I didn't want to cover up any of the jelly rolls. And then I have this backside because, you know, you've got to make an apron reversible, right? So I was trying to do everything. This is my pocket side. And as you can see, it's got to be gathered on the bib. And here is the bib. This is as far as I got. I couldn't figure out how to do a waistband. You know why? Because such an overachiever, and I was literally underarmed with information because I wouldn't buy a pattern. I'm stumped at the waistband where I need to gather this onto it and tie it off because I insisted it was going to be reversible. Well, talk about shooting yourself in the head. So what did I do with it? I did with it what we would do any worthy whip or work in progress. I packaged it up like so, put it on my shelf, and there it sat. I said 13, it was probably 2012. I have enough to make 2 of these aprons, but by now I hate them. I literally hate them. So I'm trying to decide, do I bring them out and finish them up, give them to my daughter and daughter-in-law, who probably will love them, or do I continue to look at this project box on my shelf? And that's my jelly roll mess up. Now back to the jelly roll quilt that I'm doing for Christy. So far, I have all but the last border on. The last border is the wide one. I need to put that on, and then we're ready to take it down to the long arm and quilt it. She asked for Cuddle. I've got a great color of Cuddle. This is going to be a beautiful quilt. Let's get going on it, guys, so we can get this video over. What do you say? This is the final border. Isn't it just, oh my gosh, so Brady Bunch. Anyway, I think it's darling. My sis-in-law, Wendy, and I checked, and I cannot justify, there is not enough of this fabric for me to be able to do a bias joining the way I like to do. So I'm doing these with a straight edge, and I'm just going to have to deal with the bulk. There's not, it's not the ideal situation, but it will work. And there's nothing wrong with it. What I do is I trim off this selvage edge. So let's get these sewn up and on the quilt. And the last one, number 6. Now we just have to turn on the iron. I have a quilt fairy in my studio today, everybody. Wendy is sitting right here, and all I said was, now we just have to turn on the iron. And I winked, and she gets up and turns on my iron. Wouldn't it be nice to have a quilt fairy like that all the time? So we're going to press the crease out, press this seam flat, then I'll pin it on. We'll do our sides and top and bottom borders. What do you think? Ta-da! This has been a really fun ta-da to get to. And all week long, I've been working with my sis-in-law, Wendy. Hi. We've been having fun in the shop. This is the quilt that Wendy and I made. Isn't that cute? 2 quilt tops in 1 week. You know what, guys? Real time, not going to get this quilted this week. So we're kind of done for the week. I want to talk to you about doing something like this. Buy extra fabric, just a little bit of extra fabric. I have to tell you, working with all of the numbers and the quilt math was so stressful, and Wendy helped me with it. The engineer helped me with it. It was totally above my pay grade, but I did it. And I just barely had enough fabric. In fact, let me show you. Look at that. The selvage actually goes over onto the quilt. That's how close. Shut the front door. Stop the action. We need to back up and go left in this video. What am I talking about? Well, some time came up, and look what we're doing. We're putting a pattern on this beautiful quilt, and it's called Retro Flowers. What do you think? Isn't that pretty? And we're just about done. So that means I'm gonna bind it. Isn't that gonna be cool? Right in front of your eyes. The quilting is done, and I'm about to bind this beauty and ship it out in the mail, but I want you guys to hang with me while I do it. You all know that quilting on the back side when you do cuddle is magnificent. The reason for this is the cuddle has got a deep pile, and it pulls a little row of threads down so you can really see the design in it. I love the effect of cuddle on the back of a quilt. Oh, by the way, I have my binding already made. I just need to trim the quilt. When you cut cuddle, it's a mess. It's like a rabbit explodes in your shop. So this is our solution, and we just vacuum it up as we go. We run it right along the edge of the quilt and on our cutting boards, and it does a great job of cleaning that mess up. Secondly, I'm sure you saw me throwing a bunch of this cuddle away. This quilt was done with the very end of the bolt, so there's a huge chunk on the end, but it's a baby quilt size. If I do a baby quilt with this on the back of it, and it's most likely that's what's going to happen, I will have enough of this to do a cuddle binding. If you don't know what a cuddle binding is, you need to watch more of my videos, but I will link that one specifically in the description down below. So this is what I'm going to do. I don't use those fancy rollers. I'm just going to do that. That's how I do it. My floor's clean and it's not going to be on the floor that long. I'm going to lay this binding right along the edge, and I'm really excited to do my binding hack where I put the extra little 1/16 of an inch on the corner. I've not done that on a cuddle quilt yet, so here goes nothing. I want it right on that edge, and then I'm going to lengthen my stitch to about 2.5. I'm going to take a few stitches and stop and test to make sure I have it where I want it. Yep, and it looks like I do. Oh my, this quilt is just adorable. I love these colors, even though I hated them in my mother's house in the 60s. Thank you to those who bought me cups of herb tea this week. April Dahlberg, you're becoming a regular. Thank you very much. You do keep me going. And Connie White, I appreciate it very much. Did you know my aunt is Connie White? And she was actually in a video receiving a quilt. So, small world. Last week's video was about the pre-cut quilt kit. And I prefaced it by saying quilters hate this. I did a bunch of research before the video, and quilters do hate cutting out. But it seems like all of you who love cutting out commented. So thank you to everybody who commented. There were a bunch of you that commented about the blood on the quilt. And you were telling me that spit does get the quilt out. Or you told me that spit does get the blood out. I always knew that spit got blood out, but I guess I'm fussy. It grosses me out. I cannot spit. So I'm not going to spit, but thank you to the bunches of you that told me about hydrogen peroxide. That was nice. And many of you were nurses. How about that? Way to go, nurse quilters. Yay. You know, Blue Block is a nurse quilter. Love you all. Michelle Busta, you and a bunch of other viewers bought pre-cut quilt kits from My Fabric Addiction. Kim thanks you. And while we're talking about my friend Kim, Marie Johns, what a small world. I can't believe that you're friends with Kim. That was so much fun to hear. I immediately called her up and she goes, "Oh, Marie, I love Marie. We go back." So thanks for saying something, Marie. Maybe the three of us will have to get together and go on a fart. Speaking of farts, there are quite a few that liked my fart story. Now, for those of you seeing this for the first time, FART is the acronym for a fabric acquisition road trip. It's not a disgusting, smelly thing. But Sue Lambert, RU4 Rapido, Janie Sato, Andrea Graham, and Cheryl Finoglio loved my fart story. It was a crazy, fun story. So if you haven't seen it, I'll link the video below so you can watch it. Thank you to all of you for watching my channel. I love your support. I love your comments. Keep them coming. Ta-da! Christy, I'm going to package this up and ship it back to you in the mail. What do you think? I really had fun doing a quilt makeover for you. Thanks for trusting in me. I adore this binding with this bright pop of aqua, and it just, everything goes with the backing. Isn't the backing just gorgeous? I think the design is perfect. It's called Retro Flowers. It matches this pink up in here. I have a feeling your daughter's going to love her new quilt. And also, Christy asked for wool batting, and the wool gives it a little bit more loft. It's just a little bit puffy. How fun is that? So Christy, thanks for letting me do a makeover on your quilt. Thanks to all of you in YouTube land for watching my channel. I really appreciate it. If you like my channel, I would love it if you would subscribe. I'm really racing for that silver play button, and they're not going to give it to me without subscriptions. I swear, what's wrong with them anyway? Next week, I have a really fun video planned for you. You know, it's going to be September, and the early leaves are starting to turn. The kids have been in school for 2 weeks. What do you think my quilt project for next week is going to be? I'll give you a hint. It's scrappy. Can't wait to see you next week. Thanks for watching. Bye.